Hello everyone and welcome back to the next lesson. In this one, we will be beginning a kind of longer journey where we are going to be making several cuts that are heavy on effects animation, and I will do them, as previously mentioned, in a way that is kind of reminiscent of how I would approach them in a professional sort of environment. That being said, in front of us, we have an empty storyboard, and let me preface this by saying that I'm not a storyboard artist. I'm just choosing to do it this way so that when we are planning out our shot, we're kind of left with a storyboard that we can then kind of reference, which would of course be what you would originally or typically do in a production. And then kind of based off this one, we will work and create all of these separate cuts of animation. Usually, when you create any animation from scratch, you're already kind of planning it either in your head or by drawing a couple of rough pictures, so on and so forth. So drawing a rough storyboard is also a very legitimate way of going about planning a shot. And again, this is also just so we actually have something to kind of reference in terms of a sort of professional environment. Secondly, I'm choosing to kind of mimic this Japanese sort of workflow. The reason being that, as I previously mentioned, I've worked for studios all over, be it Western or Eastern productions, but I found that, for example, the Japanese production is something that is still a bit more obscure, I suppose, also just because of a language barrier, but just in general, when I think back on my journey, not as much information about it could be easily accessible. There are some things that I've always wondered for a while before I learned them, so I figured including this workflow will kind of answer some of those questions, and that's why we're choosing this particular sort of workflow. That being said, let's just go ahead and kind of get to draw, and I will kind of explain the storyboard and try to implement a few sort of basic things that you might see in an actual storyboard, so that whenever you see them, you can kind of recognize some of these basic ideas. First of all, on the left-hand column here, we can see the number of the cut that we are working on. So, for example, we are going to make the first cut and draw it in here. In the action column, you'll often have some description of what is going on, also maybe sound effects or dialogue in here. And on the right-hand side, you will see the length of the cut. So, for example, 2 plus 0, 0 for 2 seconds and 0 frames. For our animations, or rather for our little sequence, I've thought of several cuts that would include all kinds of effects that we have worked on so far, and we'll be kind of using those cuts to push ourselves a bit further in terms of the complexity of the animation. So, for the first cut, I kind of imagined maybe some sort of long, wide shot where we are very close to the ground, maybe even, and we are kind of witnessing and observing a kind of rocket launch from the distance here, where we can see some smoke rising like so. And then I imagined that we are kind of close to a body of water in the foreground here, maybe even at the level of the waves, very close to the ground or to the sort of horizon line. We will then just see this rocket kind of begin its journey and launching up into the sky, and consequently kind of pushing a bunch of smoke and creating these kind of large smoke clouds that you might know if you've ever watched a kind of rocket launch video or something like that online. And let's have this cut just be maybe 2 seconds. We won't be super strict with some of this. We might change some things up if we think it looks good. But for now, let's just have a rough idea of how long we want all of this to be. And as this happens, here in the foreground where we have the water, I would like some kind of light, sort of lightning effect to just kind of appear and just slowly kind of creep its way in at the end of the cut. Since I want to include a lot of different kinds of effects, we're going to be combining a lot of different types in each cut. So in this example, we obviously have the smoke cloud kind of developing. This itself, you can make quite complicated if you like. Then we might animate the water here in the foreground, depending on how close we are to it, how close to the actual surface we are. And then, of course, some small lightning effects. For the second cut, I then imagined this kind of same view, similar, but further away. And maybe we just very small in the distance on the horizon kind of see some of these smoke clouds and the kind of trail that this rocket is leaving as it's rising into the air. And in the foreground, we can kind of imagine this to maybe be the big lake or something like that. We're in the water here, or close to the water. And I would then kind of place some rocks here in the foreground, in the water, so to kind of near a shore on this side behind the camera, essentially. And I would like the kind of waves here to really build up and crash into these kind of rocks here in the foreground. As all of this happens, we then kind of want this kind of creeping lightning and static effect to continue. And as this kind of impact with the rock and the waves has calmed down a little bit, if we just kind of draw the waves here a bit, maybe like so. And I would want this ball of light, maybe of lightning, to emerge out of the water. And what we're gonna have happen here is that sort of lightning effect, whatever it is, whether it's sentient or not, it will kind of be trying to take down this rocket that we have in the background. This would be our second cut. And in fact, we have it rise up and have this lightning kind of play around with it. So we have some complex water effects with some lightning here. And as we kind of keep going, I then want this lightning to get a bit more aggressive and a bit stronger and bigger. Below this kind of orb, the water begins to kind of spiral from the point that it kind of came out of the water, creating this vortex. And that would be the second cut. So quite a bit happening in this one. Let's make it, say, 4 seconds. Next, let's have this kind of wide shot here from above, from pretty far away, where we maybe kind of see some of the surrounding landmass. And over here, we'll have our kind of orb close to the kind of shore of this side, the lake. And over here, of course, somewhere in this direction, we will have the actual rocket launch. But now maybe we just have some hills here and some cliffs and maybe even some buildings or something like that close to the actual site of the rocket launch. And what I'd like to do is from very far away to kind of show this lightning growing more aggressive around this sort of magical orb before it decides to kind of shoot off towards the right side of the screen, creating this kind of big splash on the water, these ripples throughout the lake.